Hello everyone and welcome to Techstrong TV. Today is Thursday, August 10th, and I hope you all are having a wonderful day so far. I'm your host, William Willis, and in today's show, we're going to bring you some fantastic interviews with incredible guests from around the world, so stay tuned. First up, we will head over to Allen, where he will meet with Nick Tosek, lead security automation architect at Swimlane, to talk about how breaking down silos and fostering collaboration between teams is crucial for strengthening the overall security posture. Then, Allen sits down with Sasha Laborie, co-founder, board member, and CSO of CloudBees, to hear about a preview of DevOps World and some more insight into new CloudBees offerings. Next, we will air an episode of Techstrong Women. In this episode, Jody Ashley and Tracy Reagan speak to Christine Abernathy of F5. We will then go to Bonnie, where she speaks with Nipun Sharma, CEO of SJW Robotics, about the future of food service in robotics, AI, and sustainability. Then we will air 2 episodes of View with Vizard. First, Mike interviews Curtail CEO Frank Huerta, as Frank explains why there's a huge need for automation tools that detect security flaws in software. Then Mike interviews Dror Kashti, CEO of Sweet Security, and Ayal Fisher, Chief Product Officer of Sweet Security, to dive into what's needed to better secure cloud-native application runtimes. Then, to wrap up this broadcast, we will air a session from Cloud Native Now 2023. In this session, Christina DePinto, Product Marketing Manager at Tenable, and Upker Ladar, Senior Product Manager for Tenable, will walk through the best practices for preventative container security and the common implementation challenges that we see. That's what we have coming up for you in this episode of Techstrong TV. So without further ado, let's get the show started. Enjoy.
This is Techstrong TV.
Hey everyone, welcome back here to Techstrong TV. I am really happy to introduce you to my next guest. His name is Nick Tosek. Nick is the lead security automation architect over at Swimlane, and we're going to find out a lot about that here in just a moment. Let's first welcome Nick. Nick, welcome to Techstrong TV.
Thanks very much. Happy to be here.
Happy to have you. So Nick, I said you were lead security automation architect, but everybody has titles today. Tell us about yourself.
Sure. So I've been in the security space since 2010. I started off as a network security analyst back in the days of Snort and unencrypted traffic.
You're talking my language.
Yeah. It was the Wild West, they were just kind of throwing everyone who had IT chops at the security problem and seeing who stuck. So that's how I got my start. Went to a couple other places as a network security analyst, also did some long-term analysis, and I started developing a passion for automation early on. One of the things that I saw consistently affecting SOCs I was working in was that an over-reliance on manual processes was taking obviously too much time, but it was also causing a lot of inaccuracy and a lot of inconsistency between what various analysts were doing in the field. So I started teaching myself Python pretty early on and started using that to develop more and more complicated scripts and eventually, fully automated solutions to help us handle the workload and provide consistent results across our team. Worked for a couple MSSPs as well. And then about 5 years ago, I came to Swimlane. At Swimlane, as the lead security automations architect, I do a number of things, but the main purpose of my job is to help my team develop content that we use in a wide variety of customers to solve security automation problems or challenges. So we do things like from the basic stuff like phishing triage and similar triage, through remediation, through employee onboarding, offboarding, even document updates and edits and stuff like that. We touch a lot of things with automation these days at Swimlane, and that variety of use cases that we're able to perform as not just a company, but in the entire automation space is increasing day by day.
Absolutely. Absolutely, man. Just listening to your journey, I'm like waxing nostalgic, right? But it's also the journey of where we've come in security, right? We've moved from basically network security analysts sitting there scraping, glass and getting desensitized to, and then being overwhelmed, frankly, to moving towards security automation. And now, we didn't mention it, but with AI and everything, machine learning AI, we're hopefully better than ever, or making more progress towards this. Before we jump into our big topic today, though, for people who want to get more information about Swimlane, where can we send them?
Sure. Swimlane.com is our website. We've got some demos on there. We've got some great resources to help you realize the value that security automation can provide your organization. And we've got all kinds of recorded presentations and blog articles and things to help you get to know us better and understand the security automation space as a whole better.
Cool, man. Excellent. All right. Let's jump into our topic of discussion today, though. And we were going to talk about, well, on my teleprompter here, it's unraveling the siloed barrier. But really what we're talking about, like the 1984 commercial, right? Breaking down the walls between infrastructure engineering and security teams. And look, this is a long-standing wall, a long-standing border, no man's land like DMZ, and in between North and South Korea, where, like you, I'm from the security side of the house, and a lot of security people say those people just don't take security seriously. No one cares about security but us. And the infrastructure engineering people are just, hey, these security people, they slow us down. Everything is no with them, right? But and probably the truth lays somewhere in between, right?
Of course.
But we've made some progress, but let me get your take on that.
Sure. So yeah, like you said, it's been a struggle for a long time, kind of a battle. As somebody who's been on both sides of the house as an engineer and also doing the security side, I've definitely seen both sides of the coin, and both sides are important for sure. You need velocity, you need your infrastructure operations and engineering efforts to not be restricted unnecessarily, but you also need to keep security best practices in mind when you're doing these things. And I think that a lot of the progress that we've made as an industry in the past 8 to 10 years, I guess, as DevOps has kind of transformed into DevSecOps, is that more thought is being put into the initial infrastructure construction and maintenance and all of these really important holistic things that traditionally were kind of ignored in favor of kind of the fire drill approach to security, which kind of was the main approach that we saw for most organizations a little earlier on in the history of the cybersecurity journey, right? So, security is not a bolt-on. You can't just only pay attention to it when it's a problem. You have to really take a holistic approach and integrate security into your initial infrastructure posture as well as your update plans and your organizational plans and everything. And I think that as an industry, we've definitely made strides in that arena, but we still have a ways to go for sure.
For sure, we've made some strides, but yes, also for sure, we still have a way to go. So, let's first start with some of the strides. Let's emphasize the positive rather than the negative. Nick, in your, since you're here 13, 15 years, in this space looking at, what would you think some of the big gains have been? What have been the big wins?
I think a couple of the big wins have been, one, awareness. Just like with any issue, awareness is critical. I think that everyone from executive teams to field agents to sales to everyone understands now that security is incredibly important to an organization's basically operational capability. If you're not taking security seriously, it will come back to bite you. There are an almost infinite variety and number of bad actors out there. Everyone wants, R&D secrets or money or something. And if you're the low-hanging fruit, you will be plucked. And I think that the awareness of that across pretty much every organization has been a huge benefit to not just security organizations within those organizations, but also to everyone's security posture in general. If everyone's taking it more seriously, it's kind of that rising tide effect where, there's fewer low-hanging fruit and the attackers have to work that much harder to achieve their goals. Mm-hmm. I think also operationally, there's been a lot of push to break down these silos, break down these walls between the various functions within an organization. I think that people have really recognized the criticality of including security early on, the security department early on in your designs, instead of just waiting, like I said earlier, for that fire drill approach where you're just waiting for something to go wrong and then addressing it when it does.
I agree with you. Look, I always look at things as people, process, technology. I think one of the, quite frankly, the biggest problem we had was people, right? As I alluded to earlier, half jokingly, we didn't have a meeting of the minds between security and infrastructure engineering, or for that matter, DevOps and developers, everyone with security, right? And I think that is a front where we have made a ton of progress from the, as you say, from the executive C-level, board level on down. People are recognizing, yes, security is important. These aren't, Henny Penny and Boyle cried wolf kind of things. We've got to take security seriously. And here's another thing that I've learned, Nick, and that is, no one raises their hand and says, I don't give a crap about security, or I don't mind having Swiss cheese security and having, bad things. We all want good security. We all want quality. So I think from the people point of view, we've made a heck of a lot of progress. Yeah, there's still, bumps along the way, but we've made progress. From a technology point of view, I think we've made some decent progress too. We actually have security products now that are geared to non-security folks using them. Right? We see it in the DevSecOps, the shift left thing and all that. Mm-hmm. Again, not perfect, but we've made good progress there. The processes, though, I think are still sort of a no man's land.
Yeah, I would agree with you there. I think that a lot of this stuff has yet to be really well codified in a lot of organizations.
Yeah.
It's still a lot of kicking stuff over the wall, what remains of the wall, to, the security team, like, hey, can we do this? And they either say yes or no, and then you fight over it a little bit. And there's definitely a lot of benefit to having good processes around how the security team is expected to interact with every other facet of your organization. Having an ad hoc approach to that, there's going to be gaps and things are going to get left behind, or communication is going to break down. And obviously neither of those is desirable.
No, they're not. And I think, forewarned is forearmed in these cases, right? You can't do, the ad hoc approach doesn't do it. So, Nick, let's talk a little bit about how does Swimlane help here?
Sure. So, Swimlane has been around for, I think, about 7 or 8 years now as an organization. And we are currently the largest pure play security automation organization in the world. There were some other competitors of ours that have since been bought up by other companies. So we are currently the largest, basically, SOAR company on the market. As such, we've had a pretty interesting variety of customers over the years that have exposed us to a lot of different needs inside and outside of security. I think really the strength of Swimlane as a company and as a platform is that it's extremely customizable, and that allows you to use a lot of functions outside of traditional SOC use cases. I think a limitation of a lot of SOAR products on the market is that the S for security is where they start and stop. And they don't really, either they don't support use cases like HR type stuff or legal type stuff, or it's just not on their roadmap because it's not, a revenue center or something like that, whatever business decision is made. But really, to me, the strength of Swimlane is that you can build almost anything once you learn the processes and how to use the product. As long as the products you're interacting with have an API, we can interact with it and we can perform any kind of orchestration automation. And we also have a really robust case management system, really nice record designing, that gives you a really good front end experience as well. That's extremely customizable, as opposed to a lot of SOAR products. So I think that's really where Swimlane can help. Specifically, Swimlane can help is not just increasing your security posture within the SOC, but expanding outside of the SOC to these kind of orbits around it. And as you do break down those silos between security and DevOps and infrastructure and all these other organizations, the more information you can keep together, the better of a kind of system of record you have of everything that's happening from a security perspective in your organization. So yeah, I think that's really where we excel in general, but also specifically related to this conversation. I think that being able to expand outside of the traditional SOC use cases is absolutely huge, and it's something we're going to see a lot more from various automation platforms in the future.
I agree with that 100%. Nick, we're about out of time. I want to thank you for coming on here and telling us about this. And look, I didn't realize that Swimlane is now the leading SOAR standalone SOAR out there.
Yep. We're at the time of this recording, we are also number 1 on Gartner peer reviews. So
good for you guys.
We have a lot of happy customers, which is a great place to be. We work hard, and we really try to help our customers succeed with their use cases. Whatever they're building. We have a great professional services team too, who does an amazing job just building things that you can barely dream of sometimes. It's like physical security use cases that monitor whether your doors and gates are open and when your employees coming in and out. Like, I've never seen a SOAR platform do that before. It's really cool.
Me either. Very cool. Hey man, thanks for coming on. Keep us posted and best of luck.
Thanks. Have a great day.
All right, Nick Taussig, lead security automation architect at Swimlane, talking about SOARs, talking about busting down barriers between infrastructure, engineering, development, DevOps, and security. We're going to take a break here on Techstrong TV. We'll be right back.
Discover the cutting-edge insights of our new show, AI Times, a series that explores the limitless potential of artificial intelligence. Sponsored by the AI Infrastructure Alliance, the AI Times is at the forefront of the AI revolution, tackling the crucial questions of how we can leverage AI for the betterment of humanity. Stay ahead of the curve as this show delves into all things surrounding AI, including trends, pressing concerns, and the positive impact AI is making around the globe. AI Times.
This is Techstrong TV.
Hey everyone, welcome back here to Techstrong TV. I'm happy to be joined in this segment by, he's not old, but he's a longtime friend of mine from the DevOps world, co-founder, chief strategy officer at CloudBees, my friend Sasha Lavare. Sasha, first of all, welcome back to Techstrong TV. You look well. I hope all's well with you.
Thank you for having me, Alan. Very happy to be here.
Absolutely. Sasha, COVID's sort of in the rearview mirror. We hope, though there's been numbers have creeped up a little bit, but, people aren't dying the way they were. And we're back. We're back to in-person events. Things are getting back to some sort of normal. And part of that in the DevOps space is the return of DevOps world. And we had, actually, I was lucky to have Sean Ahmed on a couple weeks ago. And we talked about the upcoming DevOps World plans, which instead of having sort of one big show in San Francisco or Vegas or what have you, we're going to have sort of a DevOps World Roadshow in New York, Chicago, Silicon Valley, I believe London, and then Singapore as well.
That's right, yes.
A lot of exciting stuff going on. Are you, I imagine you're excited by it. Tell us a little bit about what you're thinking and seeing.
Yeah, I'm excited. You know that business better than I do, right? How to do events, and you know that by now you can only get it wrong, right? So if you had an on-site event in 2020, wasn't good news. If you had an off-site in 2021, nobody wanted to come. Then you do online get bored. And we had this very interesting approach last year. We organized something in Florida in the midst of a hurricane.
Yeah.
So that went well.
Yes, I remember.
Yeah, so this time the idea was to try with something different, right? Because I think people like the personal touch, like to meet with other people, get to talk about technology and the future and so on. But at the same time, I see people less inclined maybe to cross ocean or to go east to west, west to east, just for 2 days for a conference and so on. So I think this is a great way to get the essence of what made DevOps World and in the past Jenkins World successful. Practitioner to meet, to speak about the state of affair, also the cool things coming up, and also challenges they're facing and how they're solving it. So we decided to do those smaller events, but 5 of them in different locations, so people get to attend without traveling too much. So hopefully it's going to be the best of both worlds, but we'll only know that next year, I guess.
Well, I think it will be. There's some, and again, I realize you can't let the cat out of the bag, and I don't want to get you in trouble. But there's some interesting announcements that are going to be made at DevOps World. Some new functionality, perhaps, around both Jenkins and CloudBees Enterprise, and maybe even new products coming out. Without getting in trouble, can you give us a hint?
You don't want to be, you don't want to get in trouble, but I don't want to get in trouble either.
Right.
But I'll give you a few hints. It's true on the Jenkins side of the house. Jenkins is this amazing piece of critical infrastructure, right? And we were talking about that last time, right? How Jenkins gets to this position of critical infrastructure, been around for 18 years. In those 18 years, it has spread absolutely everywhere, from under developers' desk to highly sensitive production environments, from Kubernetes to embedded software. It's everywhere. And so you could argue that, well, CloudBees has been at it for 13 years. What else can there be? And there are always behaviors that change in CI/CD, always new things people want to see solved, and those requests come in waves. So that's what we do most of the time. We look at what those organizations need at any point in time. However, there are some functionalities, some things that people have always wanted, right? It's to make sure that, how do you take care of your critical infrastructure? How do you make sure it's always on, it doesn't go down, and so on? Those requests have always been around. And so at DevOps World this year, we're going to make some amazing announcements on that front, amazing demo. So if people want to see it, want to touch it, want to try it, it's an amazing place to come, because we're going to have some very beefy new features coming up for the Jenkins community, the CloudBees customers, but part of the Jenkins community.
Absolutely.
So that's
Absolutely.
one.
Okay.
That's one. So that's the Jenkins side of the house. And as you know, we when we started CloudBees in 2010, we were actually 100% a cloud company, right? We were doing CI, CD, code repository, deployment, everything was in the cloud. And we reoriented towards doing, only quote unquote Jenkins around 2013 and 14. So that has been our DNA for now close to a decade. Being this software company, we do have some SaaS software, but for the most part, we've been a software company in the last decade. And this is about to evolve. We're going back to our roots of who we were in 2010, and it doesn't mean that one is getting rid of the other, right? It's going to be cumulative. We're really entering back into a very cloud/SaaS type of approach. So we're going to have a bunch of news coming up on that front as well. I'm super excited by that. There is an amazing amount of work, amazing amount of energy that we've spent in the more than a year on this. And so DevOps World will be the culmination of those efforts. So that will be with lots of pride. We will show our baby to the world.
Fantastic. Hey, just for our friends out there looking, I think the first DevOps World in New York, I want to say it's around September 13th or 14th, something like that.
Yeah. I think the very first event we did, wasn't it in Santa Clara, actually?
No, I'm saying for this year's DevOps World.
Yeah. For this,
is in New York around September 13th, 14th. It was in Santa Clara. I was there. But this year it's coming up. So it's about a month from now, so you can check that out there. I know we'll have some of our folks there covering it. And we're actually talking with CloudBees. We might be streaming live video from the one in Silicon Valley, which I want to say is October. I forgot the date off the top of my head.
October 18 and 19. Yep. That's correct.
But if you go to DevOpsWorld.com, you can get all the information, speakers. Sasha, we're very excited to see what's happening, not just on Jenkins, but sort of this return to its roots. And it's going to be, I think it'll be a lot of fun. It's going to be a great time. It's good to have DevOps World back. It's good to have you back on Techstrong TV, my friend. Don't be a stranger. Also, for those who don't know, Sasha's recently been appointed to the board of the CD Foundation, part of the Linux Foundation. So maybe we'll have him on a future CD Pipeline show as well.
Thank you, Alan. And I'll be super happy to see you again face-to-face.
I can't wait.
Clara, at least.
Good. Sasha Lavaree, Chief Strategy Officer, co-founder, CloudBees here on Techstrong TV. We'll take a break. We'll be right back.
In today's fast-paced and ever-evolving digital landscape, digital readiness has become a fundamental imperative for enterprise success. Business leaders need to understand how to leverage cutting-edge technologies such as AI, machine learning, and data analytics to accelerate digital transformation, boost business growth, and be at the forefront of driving exceptional customer experiences. On September 13th, 2023, Digital CXO Virtual Summit will focus on all of the current issues surrounding digital transformation. industry leaders will share valuable insights gained from their own digital transformation journeys and tips on how to become a future-ready technology business that sustains long-term growth. They'll also address common challenges that C-suite executives face in driving digital initiatives and provide practical strategies to overcome them. Register for Digital CXO Virtual Summit today.
Hi, everybody. Thanks for joining us for another episode of Techstrong Women, where we feature amazing women doing amazing things in tech. I'm Jody Ashley, executive producer here at Techstrong, and I'm here with my co-host, Tracy Reagan, creator and CEO of Deploy Hub. And in her free time, she's super active, busy working with the Linux Foundation. Before I introduce today's guest, I want to give you a quick update about what's going on here at Techstrong. We just launched our newest site, techstrong.ai, so be sure to go check that out. There's a lot of great content up on there. We have a couple virtual events coming up you can check out. August 16th is Data Ops Day, where we're going to take a deep dive into the world of data and data ops, and you're going to hear from data and business leaders who've adopted data ops to achieve their goals for quality, security, and speed. And on September 13th, we will be having a Digital CXO Summit, which is going to be amazing. We've got a bunch of industry leaders who are going to share their insights from their own digital transformation journeys, tips on how to become future-ready technology businesses that sustain long-term growth. So important right now. They'll address common challenges C-suite executives face in driving digital initiatives and provide practical strategies to overcome them. So we can always use great tips. So definitely tune into that. You can register for all our events by going to techstrongevents.com, and be sure to tune in every day to techstrong.tv for great shows and interviews. Okay, Tracy, what's on your mind today?
Well, I've kind of been on this AI kick, and it's probably because I have some Google searches set up so I get all these news events. But today, something interesting happened with Salesforce. Salesforce is sort of literally doubling down on AI. They announced today that they're going to increase their venture capital for generative AI startups to 500 million.
Wow.
It's a statement, so now I just want to tell everybody, I'm so tired of hearing about the technology recession, because there's not a technology recession. There's a technology pivot going on. There's still tons of money out there. There's great jobs, and we're just learning new things, and we're doing new things. So Salesforce has always had this service called Einstein that I'm not really sure how it worked on the back end, but it provided you, so it helps you kind of harvest the information that you're gathering in Salesforce. But they have now an AI cloud that is really going to focus on these large language models. So there'll be it'll host a large language model service around AI. So this stuff is happening. It's happening, and it's happening really, really fast. When you get these kinds of notices and things popping up in your Google search on such a regular basis, you know that this is a very busy industry. So for all of you out there who maybe just graduated from college or looking for a way to really fire up your career, and we talked about Tensor last time, this is your generation. This is what's happening. So keep an eye on it.
Absolutely. It's everywhere. You can't turn anything on without hearing about AI, good, bad, and everything in between.
Yep.
Well, I would love to introduce you to our guest today. Her name is Christine Abernathy. Christine, welcome, and tell us a little bit about yourself.
Thank you, Jody, and thank you, Tracy. Thanks for having me on this show. So I currently lead open source at F5. I've been here probably just about 18 plus months, coming up 2 years in September. And I've been in sort of like open source land for kind of close to a decade, seriously, obviously using it beforehand. And I was born and I was raised in Kenya. So I came to the US for school, and I've been here ever since in all kinds of tech fields. And you never know where things are going to go. So it's always been an exciting world of, like you say, pivot. And sometimes when you look back at your life, it's like a series of pivots. That's the way I could say it.
Well, just so all of you know, I heard Christine talk at a Linux Foundation event, and from that, I immediately tried to connect with her on LinkedIn. I poked her, and then I saw her again at OpenSSF, and I kind of grabbed her and I said, Christine, it's Tracy. We would love to have you on to talk about open source and something that I know is really passionate to you, and I love the topic, and that's mentoring. But before we get on that topic, don't you think that right now, because I know you've worked with people in, career development and, kind of exploding technical skills, don't you think that AI is where, if you were starting out brand new, where would you want to get a job?
It would be that. I've seen seasoned folks who have been doing like great projects, whether it's like these JavaScript libraries, kind of feeling this fear of missing out, this FOMO, like, they're like, can I go back and start again because it's just so exciting. I think it's more like the possibilities seem so endless. Even earlier today, as I was listening to an AI podcast, I try to spend time on that, an hour or so at least per day. And I was like, I wish I could tell people who even have no tech background, even just like, come check it out. I mean, your imagination can kind of go crazy. And this is like the place to do it. I agree.
Yeah, and if you're just getting out of college, this is your generation's tech, right?
Yes.
It is where it's where the money is. It's where the growth is going to be. It's where it's where all the brains are going to be quite honest. I think it's a fascinating turn of events. If we just looked a year ago, we heard, Facebook or Metaverse and, the whole debacle around Twitter, and that AWS was laying off. And at the same time, we had this massive explosion in the ideas and the abilities around AI. So that's why I say don't get caught up in this silly discussion about a technology recession, because it's just a technology pivot.
Yeah.
And it's time to get involved.
I agree. And even if you look back in history, it's usually during these sort of lull times where the people are pulling back and hiring is going in the opposite direction. This is where the next set of startups are actually formed. So if you think about it, you've got this AI pivot, and you've also got these tech workers who are out there en masse. It's just like a great storm of like, I can't wait to see what gets actually burst out of this.
I feel the same exact way. I cannot wait to see what happens with technology in the next 2 to 3 years, and probably sooner. What do you think? And I know you haven't been at Facebook for a while, but you were there for quite some time. Do you think that the kinds of data that Facebook is gathering, what kinds of AI models could be built from that?
The closest I got to some of like the AI work was when, as a team, we were supporting PyTorch, which at that time, and PyTorch is a tool for if you're doing like research, and they were trying to pivot to not only be used for research, but all the way to production. So I spent kind of like a year in the team trying to assist the team with kind of like going into the next level. So on that stage, there is obviously quite a bit of data, and just like the people talking and discussions. And when you're thinking about everything from like languages, and there's like some really cool things that have come out of Facebook. And then the other thing that's actually pretty interesting, at least from my time there, I remember when it was like a trickle of a few research papers that were being shared to when it became like the topmost things that people were talking about. So I've seen like the openness of Facebook kind of like become very evident, and you can see it playing around with stuff like the Llama models that kind of came out within the last couple of months that are also kind of like revolutionizing sort of like the open source models. So, but in terms of like the data, there's definitely more data than you can.
There's got to be a ton of data around what Facebook's been gathering for such a long time. We did an interview with the CEO of Jelly. I can't think of her name. Maybe Jody could bring it up for me.
Nora Jones.
Nora Jones, that's right. And she had an interesting idea around just tracking tickets and predicting the potential outages or failures or problems based on the chatter that's coming through on support tickets. And she has a company called Jelly.io that so, if you think about just that, the amount of information that comes from like, I don't know, any of the chat, any of the chat services. Any chat service is going to create a huge amount of potential data to start reacting to. It's again, I'm sure your work at Facebook, you must be thinking, I wonder what they're cooking up. I wonder what they're going to do.
There's always going to be something interesting. Even like when you talk about like the chatter and tickets, there's even like the chatter when you go back to the apps that are being created, like the chatter of telemetry data that's out there that all of these different like apps kind of send out. Like how can you like instrument that so you start to kind of hear that chatter and say, okay, something's about to go down. And there's a lot of different companies that are also starting to think. And some of that is just simple data analysis. You might not need to get into generative AI, but you never know.
Yeah, well, I think the big topic right now is generative AI. I just keeps popping up.
And it will be super useful to have an AI cloud platform that's ready for you. And so I think Salesforce is making a pretty smart decision to move into that area since they already had Einstein. I'm sure they're building on top of what they had there. So interesting times, interesting new products coming out. And of course, if you're a tech geek, you get really excited about it.
Yeah. And there are other companies like ServiceNow who are also, like you're saying, in terms of like the ticketing. And I don't know if they are actually like partnered with Salesforce, but I know that they were building a large language model that's specifically going to be tailored to, I don't know if it just actually support tickets, but every company is thinking of similar, for the most part, about a couple of things. How can we train these models or create like smaller models that are on our data, and how can we do it in a way that is like secure and private? So I'm actually also excited to see some of those companies are going to be around like the tools and thinking about like the privacy, and even even if you have a lot of data and you want other teams to experiment, you have to think about like what are you exposing to these different teams that are, even if you're in the same company, that you actually can maintain that privacy but still be able to work and do all this machine learning. So I think even just like those companies that think about how do I anonymize data, how do I make it private so that I'm not sharing it out in the cloud. So that's another space that I think it's going to be pretty big as well.
So you work now with F5, and
yes.
You are the senior director for open source evangelism. Why don't you give us a little bit of your history and how you ended up at that level? We work really hard to find women at the senior levels, and especially women of color. You are not a common commodity, I can promise you. So why don't you give us a little bit of your background and give some insights in how you got to where you are?
Yeah, so I kind of got pulled into open source when at some point, I was looking for a different role within Facebook. And at that time, I wanted to work with a particular manager that I work with, that we worked pretty well together. And he had been working on open source, James Pierce, for a couple of years, almost like the sole person trying to revitalize Facebook open source. And he wasn't the only one. He had like folks around him, but he was the one person that was leading it. So I joined it. We became a team of 2, and then we became a team of 3, basically leading the open source team. And the reason why I wanted to kind of get into that was also to get a sense of when you are in open source, especially on an overall company level, you get a chance to see what is being built across different parts of the organization. And I thought that would be like really exciting, because up till then, I had been working on just like one small piece of what Facebook was working with developers. And immediately when I kind of got into it and got a chance to see a lot of open source projects grow, for me, it was exciting because you got to hear and talk to different developers, and not only in the company, but because the tech that we were building was being shared across developers, I just saw the value and the power of open source to get people who previously may have to like pay a whole bunch of licensing, or just it'd be a lot harder to build. But when we had open source, and when we shared whatever we had at Facebook, it actually help power up a lot of smaller developers. And I've always been like the underdog. I've always been for the underdog. And for me, it just fit really well with open source. So I would go and do these talks at some of these community events, and I might be talking about, say, here, you can use React, this JavaScript library to build your web apps. And when I would explain it to some people, the thing that kind of like got me really excited was talking to some folks, and they would say things like, I never really thought about a career in software engineering. In fact, I ran away when I tried it, but the way you explained it, it makes this really easy to do. I want to go home and like figure out how to build a mobile app, build this, build that. And that was exciting to me, especially when I went to other parts of the world, places where people may not be thinking that they could be building the next open source library, and hearing them say things like, yeah, that's interesting, but I don't think I could be in that league. I don't think I am smart enough to build that open source library. And I'd be like, oh, you are that smart. And then coming back, and because it was open source, them going off, learning by themselves, creating their own conferences, and coming back 3 or 5 years later and seeing those same people now be in the forefront of being like the fastest growing open source in particular countries. I think that was exciting. And I saw that as the power of open source, if done right, to basically speed up. But the question is like, the if done right is not always true, because it can also, it needs to be sometimes know how to actually act really well. So that's where like the diversity and inclusion kind of comes in, where I kind of get passionate about how do we, with all the promise that open source can get us, how can we actually marshal it and build it in such a way that it is inclusive? And sometimes it doesn't take much to get to that point, but it is still a lot of work.
So as Jody will now understand why I was so excited to have you on. I talk about this so much.
Oh, yeah. Open source is her jam.
I talk about it, yes. And, I talk about open source from the perspective of being creating a very diverse and inclusive global community. More so than just really focused on the technology. I love to focus on the people and the culture and then the technology. And I felt when I first, because I helped start the Eclipse Foundation. And when I was at the Eclipse Foundation, it felt very closed to me. You had I call them the giants. You had IBM in there, obviously. You had Red Hat, you had Oracle, you had the giants in the room. And they would bring people on to work on these open source projects. But I wouldn't really call it an open source community. I feel like Jenkins, even though CloudBees eventually took it over and it was funded, Jenkins really was a good representation of what can be done with open source. But even with Jenkins, I've spoken to women and people of color, and I've told them, why don't you contribute to Jenkins? And they're like, well, I submitted a pull request. I didn't hear from anybody, so I didn't try anymore. So when I started Ortelius, I made it a focus that it would be about community and about education, encouraging people who have never done a pull request in their entire life to go out and actually take on an issue and try it and create a pull request and see what happens, and go ahead and feel free to break things. Yeah. Break things, please. And mentorship is so important. Now, that's the one area that we have struggled with, I think, with the Ortelius project. While we've had some small successes with mentorship, we struggle with getting a proper mentorship program together. Is there a model that we should be looking at that maybe large enterprises take on, or other open source communities have done it well?
Yeah, that's a good question, because like you say, when I thought about open source, I also thought about education. In fact, there was a time in between my open source gigs at Facebook where I went off and joined the education partnerships team within Facebook, because I was also thinking about, I've always thought that education and open source kind of went hand in hand. And even before I joined the education partnerships team, I had actually tried proof of concept and open source mentorship program within Facebook, because again, to your point, I just saw that as a way to, again, bring people and make open source more inclusive around the world. And we had at that time a developer community that was that had been put in place within Facebook, called Facebook Developer Circles. And so I wanted to kind of tap into those Facebook Developer Circles. It's kind of like Microsoft, like the MVP program for Microsoft, or Google has something equivalent. I think Mozilla may also have one. So this Facebook Developer Circles was communities around the world. It might 120 plus cities across the world. And we wanted to tap into those leadership to kind of build mentorship. And the way we wanted to set it up is have 1 or 2 open source project maintainers within Facebook match up with a couple of folks within those communities. And hopefully over time, grow it up and kind of like start off this like process where we would have mentorship sort of trickle down. The thing that was interesting is that I found that a lot of people within Facebook who may not even have anything to do with those open source projects, but had a passion for being mentors, would sign up and then would actually work really well with one or two community members. And then I also found the same thing happen for me. I actually mentored people on a project which I was not even an expert on. It seemed like what people wanted in terms of mentees is they just wanted a sounding board of somebody who they was actually close to the project, or you can just like give them a like, you're doing the right thing. I'll check out your PR or your pull request before you submit it. You're on the right track. I can find somebody to unblock you. You did not even have to be an expert in that project to actually be a good mentor. And some of the best mentors were not even originally key project maintainers. In fact, some people who became mentors eventually became like key maintainers on that project because they both loved mentoring so much and then they got attached to that project. But what I found as we kind of run this proof of concept is like mentorship, you may already know, is really hard to scale, to make that that kind of like high touch, the best practices, and then like scale it out. That's where I found that was always the challenge.
That is exactly the challenge with Ortelius. Yeah. It's the scaling. We struggle with scaling.
Yeah. And it's almost like you have to have the mentor, whoever it is coming in, have the mentality that you're not going to have people burn out, because some of the best mentors who maybe like I remember once somebody said, maybe not in this context, but they say that I don't do it too well because I care too much. And it was like, I was like, is care too much a bad thing? They said, I care so much that I burn out. So if you've got that one person they're always going back and they're always being the mentor and you're not really spreading it, that's what I found was really hard.
Do you know, I should know the answer to this because I do a lot of work with the Linux Foundation, but only through a few of their, like the CD Foundation, some with the CNCF and the OpenSSF. But does the Linux Foundation have any kind of mentor programs?
They do. It's called LFX mentorship. And if you go down there, they might have like cohorts like maybe twice a year. I might have got it wrong, but they do have an LFX mentorship program. And that's been pretty good. I've heard people talk about how it's been really useful. And the other thing that's really hard when it comes to open source mentorship, and I'll talk about major league hacking in a little bit. But when it comes to mentorship, is like you've got the mentors, you might need the projects, but there's like different parts of it. So sometimes when we were running a mentorship program, we actually later on within the open source team partner up with Major League Hacking. And what they're doing is they have a focus on bringing in diverse folks into open source and other projects. But open source is one of the things that they looked at. So initially, I think one of the initial programs was Facebook, GitHub, and MLH got together to put together a cohort of people. They would have like Facebook projects and other projects, and then their major MLH, which in itself has a huge set of folks from university backgrounds. They've got that base of folks, and so they were able to bring in the folks and then pick the right folks, and then partner with GitHub and Facebook to get those folks mentored. And it was like a 6 week. Was it 6 weeks? Something like a 12-week program, I believe, 10 to 12-week program. They get to work with maintainers on a bunch of different projects. And that was actually pretty good. Again, what was kind of like a challenge at that time, maybe it's been solved, but the challenge at that time was getting enough of the projects kind of coming in from the project maintainers that were enough of a meaty project so that people could actually go in and continue to do like a good project, because people do want to work on something that's really good and meaty. And then at the end of the day, another thing that MLH wanted to focus on, and which the OpenSSF Education SIG, I'll talk about that also a little bit, is they also wanted to focus on beyond just being able to go through the project. What were the good outcomes that came out of that? Did people actually go back? Were they able to get a career, build a career, or get a job? I think that's just as important as the mentorship as well. But MLH is actually trying to think about tackling this at scale as well.
Well, Google Summer of Code helps somewhat with that. I participated in it, but we've never gotten Ortelius included in it. It's been we may be, if we try, we probably should have tried it this year, but in the past we have been too small of a project, too small. I don't know what that really even means, but to get attention and for people to know what we were doing. But I think that in terms of how they structure it, and there's money involved, so it kind of helps, right? It helps bring new open source contributors into kind of the open source family. I don't know from the mentorship or from the mentee side how much support that they get. I'm assuming the projects work with them. Isn't that correct?
That's correct. And it just also depends on how it is. Because I remember when we put together, remember I talked about the proof of concept mentorship program that I put together at Facebook. I remember one person who had gone through Google Sum of Code. And even though the one that we put together was literally only about 6 weeks long, just the attention that we gave to that particular individual, they said it just blew the Google Sum of Code out the window. But then again, it doesn't mean that one person's experience can be translated to everyone else. But it's just having that one touch with that particular mentor is what's key. The other thing that I think MLH does really well is I believe they give a stipend to there's a project mentor. So that could be like a project, say like a React or any project or the Ortelius. But then they also have somebody that is hired within the MLH that acts as more like that middle mentor as well, to take a lot of the pressure off of, say, the Ortelius project maintainer. And then that person then works with the bunch of mentees, a certain number of mentees. And because that mentor, the MLH mentor, is a paid program, as well as the mentee also gets some kind of funding around that, that's a little bit more sustainable, I would say. At least that's a model that they're trying to work within.
Well, what I would like to see is, and you mentioned the universities, but there's there's community colleges that have programming classes now. You can get certifications. Obviously, we have, university level folks, women and men graduating every day. But a lot of them have never thought about, especially in the US, contributing to an open source project. It feels to me like what would be a great program would be 1 quarter or 1 semester where they have to contribute to an open source project.
Yeah, I agree totally. And maybe it helps that some universities are putting together the equivalent of open source program offices. But I know that one thing that I used to do also at Facebook is I would do sort of like these road shows, and sometimes they were like connected with recruiting, but I would go to universities and maybe just do we're going to contribute to an open source project today, and I'll show you how to do your very first PR. Because what tends to happen in a lot of colleges is, number one, they may get a lot of, if you're a computer science student, you may get a lot of information about very theoretical, but they may not get hands-on. So they go into the real world, and the real world is doing a lot of things with open source. They may have used it, but they may not have contributed. So I really love doing this, your first PR. This is the first time you contribute to open source. And it would just be like a half hour exercise or a workshop that people would use. And even within the OpenSSF, I mentioned previously, there was a mobilization plan around education. And part of that, there was a line item in there related to how do we work with diverse, underrepresented communities. But even within that plan, there has been an education special interest group that has taken over that mobilization plan. And within that, there's a diversity, equity, and inclusion piece of it that's also thinking about how do we partner with some of these different universities, but overall, how do we actually even partner with the universities in general? And one thing that we're discussing around there is, can we get workshops and some of these things put together? Because we've also been having these office hours within these DEI 6. And invariably, 1 or 2 people, we've only had a couple, but invariably somebody comes in and asks all these questions about open source, cybersecurity, how do you contribute? But in there, we always hear this nugget of how do I get started? And whenever I'd go talk about open source, especially with university students, they're always asked, how do I get started? Because it's kind of intimidating making that very first PR. But once you've done that very first PR,
and the university should be, they'll tell in terms of getting their first job, they'll say, well, let's make sure you have a good LinkedIn profile. But we know the next step for an employer, they're going to look at their GitHub profile.
Yeah, I would do that. I would do that because I would go and talk to these university students. And I remember when I was looking at somebody's resume and they had the GitHub profile, I could click on that profile right away and click on that project. So I would go and do these talks and talk about your GitHub profile is just as important. This is what you want to put in there. These are the places where you can find these friendly communities. This is how you kind of get started and going. And literally, I still have that in somewhere else, and I would love to people talk about it, but like you're saying, it needs to be a curriculum. And it
needs to be a proper course. It needs to be a 3-unit or a 3-credit or a 4-credit with a lab kind of course that says you have to do 10 pull requests and then during the semester. You pick your own project. And as you just described, you sort of had a middle layer, a middle tier that kind of helped. That professor that could be that middle tier. Because they should be watching the GitHub, the pull requests that the students are doing. They should be aware of the projects, and maybe they even know the projects. I've talked to oftentimes, especially community college instructors, and they're not involved in an open source themselves. But if they were aware of some of the programs and we could put a curriculum together, it would be fascinating. And we have a couple of college students on the Ortelius project. And some of them do get they get credit for being part of an open source project.
Oh, they do?
Yeah. Yeah.
Oh, wow.
Well, of course, India would figure that out sooner than later, right?
I know, because what I used to do as well, because I've even sort of taken the same message to some of the high schools, because when I was part of the Education and Partnerships program, I'm like, let's try to get this open source thinking early on. And so I'll talk about, because there are I forget the name of these, similar to GitHub, but it's more for a younger generation where you get to remix and you get to create these things. And it's for people who are learning how to actually learn how to code. And so I would talk about this is one way where you got this is how you remix something, but remix is almost like a GitHub pull request. And I would just talk to these teachers about this is how you can get started with people thinking about with an open source mindset really early. And the cycle is pretty common in how you do with open source. First, you use an open source project, then you can contribute to that, and then you can actually create your own. And there's all these different things in between. But if that became a course where you kind of study all of these 3 different points of how you use open source, and at the end of the day, you create your project and you're good to go. And then maybe that project feeds the next generation in that particular college, school, community college, where now they get to use some open source project that somebody created, and you pick some good ones that can actually last a pretty long time.
Oh my goodness, Christine, you got to pull that together. You got to pitch it. You must pitch it. I'm not kidding you. It's so needed. It really is. It's so needed. Yeah. And you could even do it younger because they have we've judged the supercomputing challenge in New Mexico, and every state has one, but none of the instructors were having the students have a GitHub repo. They were working on things. I have no idea how they were able to pull it all together, but they did. And a lot of times it's the tooling that they use. It's some of it simplifies the programming. But even at a supercomputing challenge, it should be do you have a GitHub profile? How are you managing your repo? All of that brings so much awareness and real life kind of strategy that's so needed in enterprises today. It's what companies are looking at. It's the first step of DevOps, right? It's checking your code in.
Yeah, and maybe because a lot of people, I remember I kind of had a moment when I went and I was at a college, I think it was somewhere in Santa Cruz, and I was basically doing something with GitHub and I was using command line, and all of the students were looking at me. They were like, "What is that?" And then I realized that okay. So I learned something really really good during that experience. The point I was trying to make is when people go into the corporate world, and then they're suddenly brought in and they have to think about all of these tools and Git, and it's just a little bit overwhelming. And so even if we could just ease the process of onboarding where people are already familiar with some of these concepts, when they get to to an actual tech company, they don't have to learn all of those different concepts again.
I'm with you. I'm telling you, you got to pull those thoughts together, and you need to pitch that. We'd love to get some funding just to put a program together at some of the, community colleges in rural areas. Yeah, because that's we're doing outreach in the areas that we haven't kind of harvested for, all the smart kids, right? Let's go find them.
Yeah.
Let's go find them.
That's true. That's true. And like you say, it doesn't take long. And that was part of the things I used to enjoy a lot, is just going out and talking to the different universities. Again, part of like the recruiting team at Facebook, a lot of them went to these universities, and we just talk about what is open source, break it down, how do you get involved. But we never talked to the professors. I mean, we did some conversations with some of the professors to try to get them to do and use some of our open source projects, but we never got it to the point of like, this is how you should build like the culture of open source within your community college. And I think that could be done on the heels of, like I said, there are some universities who are starting to think about creating like open source program office. I know the US government has in mind to create open source program office. So this, even when we talk about like, say, generative AI and some of the new career opportunities, there are a lot of career opportunities in open source. And I also like to talk about open source, not just being for people who are coding, but it's like a whole ecosystem of community managers, people who are just like developer advocates. And when people hear about that, they're like, oh, I can do that too. I'm like, yeah, open source is not just for people writing code. There's a whole ecosystem around open source.
We need artists. We need people who can produce videos. Artists. We need all kinds of roles. It's like having a startup with absolutely no funding, and it's growing. And there's so many roles in the open source community that people can.
So many roles. And when you go to say like a company and you want to say you had a dream that I want to become a product manager, you'd have to kind of learn the ropes and do a lot of things. But if you hit that right open source community, or you actually create your own open source project and it's popular, you are learning so many startup, so many startup roles in there. And you can actually become a product manager much faster going the open source route than if you go through the actual corporate route. So these are real stories that I've heard from people.
It's so important for careers. So let's shift and talk about F5. What's happening at F5? What's new and exciting?
Well, at F5, it's like I said, my role is just to kind of get at F5. F5's been thinking a lot more about open source recently, and this is after the acquisition of Nginx, which is one of like the top web servers. So, and F5, for those who don't know, is a company that thinks about making apps faster and secure. And a lot of the things that they've been building around that, one of it is like called F5 Distributed Cloud. And another part is like Nginx. So what we've been focusing as part of the open source team is where can we kind of like fit in to bring in more of that open source culture into the way that F5 works. Because historically, or in the most recent past, there were a lot of companies that have been acquired by F5 who are increasingly, because it's the world we live in, using and creating more open source projects. How we also within F5 marry a lot of those companies together and actually work within our silos, which open source is like primarily knows how to do that really well. So another thing that F5 has been doing is traditionally when F5 is known for this product called Big IP, which is a firewall, which primarily was consumed through hardware. But as the world is becoming more SaaS, F5 has become more of a SaaS-led company. So through the acquisitions and some of the other projects that have been acquired over time, it's become more of a hybrid SaaS. So people are not thinking about just like, I want my apps or my servers all locally, but thinking about things in the cloud, and they're thinking about all the workloads in various areas. And so where that is pretty important, F5 is uniquely positioned just through the acquisitions and what they've had in the past to address all of these different places. So F5, again, is thinking a lot about how do we continue to secure workloads. And there's so I've been coming up to speed in the last year and a half about F5 products, because traditionally I came from Facebook, where I had to focus a lot more on like the front end. So that's been my forte. So kind of coming back to at some point I did do some networking, and one of the jobs I had was with Nokia, which had like a hardware division. So I'm like trying to like remember some of those roots to figure out what F5 is doing. But it's exciting times. And then obviously with generative AI, just trying to like figuring out where that kind of fits in. But one of the products that F5 had acquired was a company called Shape, which does bot and fraud detection, which had a lot of AI and ML components. So there's like thoughts around that. And another project that F5 has been talking a lot about, which fits with like sort of like the generative AI, is something called adaptive application. So adaptive application is like, you've got applications, your traditional applications is like something happens, kind of like reactive. But with adaptive application is like, how do the applications themselves adapt to the environment such that whether through telemetry or data, they can either self-heal. So there's a lot of things that we're thinking around how do we play in that, how do we kind of play and lead in that space. And there's all these pieces that are being put in place, but the question is like, F5 wants to sort of like, we want to lead in that area of like, how do you create applications that kind of like recognize what's going on? So these are things that I'm still kind of like learning in terms of where F5 is going, but it's a lot of exciting times, especially as you think about data, which is like the new thing with generative AI, coming back to where we started off. Data is one thing that's really key. And that's where F5, I think, can potentially help lead, because when you think about like data APIs, making them fast, making them secure, the more data you have in there, the more this is going to be more and more important.
Yeah, I have a funny story about this. Is about F5. This is way before COVID. When I can't even remember now. It was at a conference. It was at a partner kind of dinner, and they were handing out awards for their top partners. And I was sitting kind of in a circle and chatting with mainly men. And it was F5 and a bunch of the F5 sales reps and a senior sales VP, and they started talking about their load balancing technology. And sometimes I have trouble controlling my inside voice. And I said,
Not you.
I know. I said something like, well, that technology is going to all go away. You better watch out for Nginx.
Oh, you did.
I did. And the guy looked at me and he said, it better not be going away. And I was like, it will. It's this, this is cloud native is upon us. So I was not surprised that F5 made that acquisition. I personally believe that company has done a great job of staying relevant. It's a hard road when you start from the architecture, right, and the hardware. Yeah. It's a very hard road to stay relevant, and they've done an amazing job of staying relevant. So I'm sure it's fun to work there.
Yeah, and especially like you say, you kind of called it earlier, but coming from like if you're about apps and security or whatever, you just kind of like follow the road where the road is leading. And like you say, cloud native and Nginx is the next one, and it's going to be like a continuous shift, and you just have to just be on the lookout for what's happening. So it's definitely a fun thing to kind of like see where things are shaping up, where things are going. And I think another thing that I'm more excited about as well, coming back to like the open source, is like with Nginx being open source and with a lot of CIOs and a lot of people pulling for open source projects, it's something that we always have to keep mindful of, like what's the next thing the CEO wants to buy, and how do we stay relevant? How do we stay one step ahead of where things are going? So that part is like the fun stuff.
Yeah, and again, from where F5 started, it was a hard place to stay relevant because the technology around the hardware changed so fast. Yeah, and we're going to do it again. We're going to see it again. That's why I've told everybody go learn, what tensor is, right?
Yeah,
a TPU instead of a GPU. We have to start learning that stuff because it's headed our way, and it's going to hit us really fast.
No, faster than you think. Because like even I remember when I joined F5 and I was like chatting with my sister who comes from a security background. And I was like, could you just give me the very basics of security? And it's just always interesting when you tack on something to what you know, how much just richer. Because like now knowing a lot more about security and getting involved with the OpenSSF and then having an open source background, I can see how a lot of those things should be more tightly wound together. Like they all make sense together. So like TPUs, GPUs, all new stuff to learn.
A lot.
Yeah.
And so right now F5 is part of OpenSSF. You guys are members?
Yes, we are members.
Are you members of any of the other foundations within the Linux Foundation?
I know we're definitely, so we were definitely CNCF for sure. Linux Foundation, obviously. To-Do Group we're active in. I know we're looking at CD Foundation. I'm not sure if that's in play or not. but yeah, there's a lot of things that we are looking at, but those are the key ones. And I know at some point we were also part of like the LF networking as well. I'm not sure if we're still in that part, in that foundation.
I think that the CD Foundation is unfortunately overlooked quite a bit, but it is. They have some projects in that, and I talk about CD events a lot, that has the ability to really disrupt the way we do CI/CD and deployments. And that is what we need to disrupt that right now. It is the area that needs the most disruption, because what you were talking about earlier, just understanding what's happening within the pipeline, the self-healing, all that's going to come in the data that comes across the pipeline. So it's the pipeline right now, and that delivery mechanism that really we should be really kind of looking at, how do we leverage it? How do we harvest the data out of it? Because that's where the predictive analysis is going to come from. I think the CD Foundation is still out there, and I'm rooting for it. I really am, because I think there's so much to be done in that.
We have a partnership with the CD Foundation here. I actually produce a show called The CD Pipeline. We're actually about to record an episode on the State of Continuous Delivery report that just got released in May. So I'm looking forward to that and kind of hearing about what they're up to. But yeah, Tracy definitely talks about the underrepresentation and utilization of the CD Foundation for sure.
It's definitely the underdog of the Linux Foundation in many ways, but it has one of the most critical roles. And if it's not a shiny new object, we don't tend to look at it. CNCF has been so amazingly successful around Kubernetes. The OpenSSF has got a lot of attention, mainly because Log4j. It's the reason for their existence. But the CDF just keeps plugging along, trying to actually improve the way we deliver software.
Well,
that is in essence the problem.
I think one of the things that's going to be good is that we have within some members within Nginx and some of those folks who are very much aware of CD Foundation. In fact, I think a couple of them, one of them may have spoken at the CD Foundation conference that happened just before the Open Source Summit. So I know some folks within the teams have been plugging away from CD Foundation. So I don't think we're ignoring it, but it's good to kind of know from the outside how important it is as well.
I think their CD Events project is probably one of the most important projects in terms of the software factory, if you want to call it that. I think the Events project is one of the most important, honestly. Because let's put it this way. If you want to, if Steve Taylor, my partner, did a little bit of research. He learned that in 2018, it was reported that there was over 20 million Jenkins workflows. Okay, so now we have a security issue and we want to put SBOM generation and all those workflows. We got to go edit 20 million workflows. Wow. It's not going to happen. But an event-based process, kind of like cloud events, will say you've got, a trigger, you got a payload. And you can define what you want, what tool you want to support that triggered payload, but you don't have to update a workflow. You just put a new tool in the process.
In the workflow. Oh, gotcha.
Yeah, and so they've been working on standardizing vocabulary around that, and I'm hoping that the OpenSSF can get involved and define security vocabulary and standards. What are the steps and what needs to be passed across that event, that event listener.
Okay, makes sense.
Yeah, it makes
hey, you guys, we are going long here.
Oh, sorry, we
Johnny's calling us.
Long.
I know. I'm like, where can I? But it just keeps going, and I hate. But I'm going to get yelled at if we keep talking too much.
Christine, it has been a pleasure. I love geeking out with you.
It's it says a lot that we can just keep going. That's why we're here. That's why we're doing this. These conversations are great, and people enjoy listening to them. And obviously, we have great guests like you, and people love listening to you. So thank you for being here with us. We really appreciate it. And we'll be watching out for all the fun stuff you guys are up to. It is a crazy world right now, like you both said. People need to really be thinking ahead and be very adaptable, because things are moving fast, and when you throw the AI into it, it's just going to move faster, right?
Okay, great. And I really enjoyed this conversation. Thanks, Jody, and thanks, Tracy.
Thank you. Loved it.
Thanks, you guys. Thanks for being with us today. Stay tuned for some more great programming here on Techstrong TV, and we'll see you back here in a couple more weeks with a new episode of Techstrong Women. Thanks for being here.
DevOps.com is the #1 online destination for DevOps education and community building. DevOps.com covers all aspects of DevOps, including DevOps best practices and tools, DevOps culture, DevSecOps, business impact, continuous testing, continuous delivery, and more. DevOps.com has the largest collection of original DevOps content, featuring breaking news, blog posts, podcasts, and more. Visit www.devops.com to learn more. DevOps.com, where the world meets DevOps.
This is Techstrong TV.
Hello and welcome to Techstrong TV. I'm Bonnie Schneider. Climate change brings more extreme weather. This not only affects individual daily life, but it also impacts food prices and even the availability of what we want to order for dinner at a restaurant. Well, innovative solutions are more critical than ever for the food service industry. Today, we'll be discussing the role of AI, robotics, and automation to improve the efficiency and sustainability of food service. Joining me now is Nipun Sharma, CEO of SJW Robotics, who says robotic restaurant automation is a game changer for the food service sector. Appreciate you having here, Nipun.
A pleasure to be here.
Great. Well, can you begin by sharing a little bit more about your background and how you came to lead SJW Robotics?
Sure. So I've spent the last 17, 18 years in the restaurant industry. And Bonnie, I've done everything you can think of. I've run steakhouses chains. I've run vegan restaurant chains, Chinese, Middle Eastern, Indian. I've been an entrepreneur. I've expanded restaurant chains all over the world. I've been a public company COO. So really immersed into the entire business of the food industry. And, you know, one of the things that really started disturbing us, to me personally, about 10 years ago was a shortage of labor. And in different pockets of different countries, we started noticing while demand keeps going up, nobody wants to cook at home. The supply side is kind of broken, and the labor is becoming an acute problem, in addition to sustainability, of course. So for us, we looked at automation to see how we could bridge that gap in the lack of labor. And I started calling up on food robotic companies to see if I could work with them, if the solution could work for us. Came back a bit disappointed and realized we're not quite there yet. So at this point, I coincidentally met my co-founder, an expert in robotics and automation, and we decided to go from first principles. How would we make the restaurant of the future? How would we check all the boxes of labor, sustainability, quality, accessibility, and start a restaurant from scratch? If we take away the human limitation of a restaurant, we can really stretch the boundaries on machine learning, on robotics, on AI. And that's how we sort of got into it. We started doing some initial tests. We did a sustainability study, a scoping study. Can this actually work? At that point, we raised a bit of capital, did a prototype. People got to come and see the machine. They got to kick the tires, press a button, taste the food. And then after that, we really started rolling and raising additional funds. Partnership with Compass Group in Canada and Donato's Pizza is really getting our business model in shape now.
That's fascinating. It really is what you imagine the future to be if you had to close your eyes and envision restaurants of the future. Our audience at Techstrong is very interested in AI and robotics as well. Can you explain more how you're using these technologies and what you're doing?
Sure. We in the restaurant industry, especially managing large chains, we use a lot of data, right, to predict our sales. We know there's a ice storm in Montreal. Maybe people won't come to your restaurant, so don't cook too much and staff accordingly. There's a storm in Florida. Tomato prices are 400%. Well, let's make recipes that don't include tomatoes. We try our best, with a few data points that we have that could be weeks or months old. What if we could do that real time? And so that's managing the supply side. Also the inventory, right? Food can expire if food is mishandled, human leaves chicken outside for too long. There's all these factors that come in that make our inventory management systems less efficient in a non-automated world. So we take away all these inefficiencies, look at data points that are real time. So for us, AI and machine learning goes into two categories. One is predictive maintenance of the machine. We know certain parts are being used quite a lot. It's going to break down. Let's make sure replacement parts are on hand. Person to come fix it is also ready and available during a downtime, and managing the food inventory effectively. We know chicken's expiring in 12 hours. Let's generate a promotion, 50% off your chicken dish. So managing all this stuff in a robotic environment, we can really push the boundaries. If you look at human kitchens, they're designed for the average human, right? Like 5'3", average strength. Let's make a restaurant kitchen so they don't hurt themselves, but they can make food really, really quickly. So if we take that limitation away and say, hey, what if my average human being was 10 feet tall and 18 arms and 4 heads and Arnold Schwarzenegger strength? My kitchen would look different, right? So when we looked at our kitchen, we decided to go on first principles. Here's the raw materials. Here's what the finished product needs to look like. Let's create a system using advanced robotics and automation to make that food without the limitation of a human hand movement.
So when it comes to automation of food, I was reading that different types of cuisine place different challenges. Now, that's interesting probably for anybody that cooks. People have their preferences of what's easier to prepare, but I guess robots do as well. So can you talk about that, maybe using the example of Asian food versus Italian food, and what's easier and what's not as easy, and why?
So, when we first started our company, it was not meant to be a company. It was solving my personal problems in a restaurant kitchen. And because I had done pretty much every cuisine type coincidentally, for us, the hardest to automation was Asian food because of the variability of raw materials. If you think about it, there's sloppy noodles, there's chunks of broccoli, there's shredded carrots, there's flat snow peas. How do you measure all these? We had to invent our own sensor for doing all this stuff. So we figured if we could do Asian, we could do anything. If we can't do Asian, let's just leave the next generation to come up with a solution. And if you look at the quick service restaurant industry, we've become pretty good at managing operations at scale. And again, remember, we don't have the best employees applying, so the system has to be pretty strong. So in most concepts, there's a prep area where the food is, chopped to your specifications and placed in coolers. Then there's how do you heat the food? Is it a wok? Is it an oven? Is it a grill? And how do you garnish it? So it's a fairly linear motion if you think about how food is put together at a Chipotle station or a Subway. So we've taken those basic principles of the quick service restaurant industry. So every cuisine would probably have a different way of heating the core food, but everything else kind of falls in a very similar linear pattern. So we've started, of course, with, I think, the most complex Asian food. Our second cuisine, which happens to be, I think, the easiest, happens to be pizza. It's a simpler process to cook. Conveyor ovens replace a complicated wok system. And then between these two ranges, I think we will be able to do Mexican, Italian, Indian, everything else, because there's a similarity in all these things. There's some kind of a starch, there's some kind of a protein, there's some kind of a sauce, there's some kind of a cooking mechanism. So if you look at it from that perspective, the range of food cuisines, and again, we really think people buy food by brands. You don't buy a butter chicken from a Chinese restaurant. So we really want to partner with established brands. So the customers have an expectation you'll be able to manage, like Donato's Pizza. You know what the pizza tastes like, what the quality standards are. So when an automated machine is cooking it, we need to make sure that we can meet those customer expectations or exceed them. So we become really the conduit for brands to go autonomous.
Have you had, I'm sure you have with your testing, but customers not be able to tell the difference between robot made and human made?
So if you maybe you've seen our video, and the most proud, every time somebody's come to look at our machine and taste the food, they always say, "Oh my God, this is the best pad I've ever had." And that's what I'm most proud about, because nobody cares about your machine. People come here for food. If your food is not the star, you're not going to win. But no, I love to say our machine is very futuristic, but really, if you think about it, it's not a very mind-boggling format of what we're doing. In most restaurants, the genius comes from the chef's recipes. The robot is not really making the recipe. The sauces come pre-made. What happens in a controlled environment like a robotic restaurant is we don't make mistakes. We don't overheat. We don't oversauce. So that means the recipes that are originally crafted by a great chef, they remain intact. So we'll be as good, if not slightly better, than the average restaurant using the same recipes.
And I read that some of your new self-contained units include refrigerated storage for up to 350 meals, including all proteins, vegetables, sauces, and starches that can make up to 60 meals per hour. Wow. Can you walk me through how that works?
Yeah, so a machine, the first section is the refrigerated part. There's 16 silos that contain raw materials and vegetables and proteins. There's 10 silos that contain liquids, a separate one for oil and liquid eggs. So when an order is placed, we pick up the raw materials. In an Asian concept, it typically goes into a blanching station to heat up the food before it hits the wok. In our case, it goes through a steam tunnel. That's triggered only when an order is placed. And then the food gets cooked and plated and bowled, comes to the lockers on the side. You tap your phone and your meal is ready. And we also model this to be a restaurant. Should have the same capacity of a typical restaurant, should generate the same sales as a typical restaurant. So 350 meals is what the sweet spot is. We could be slightly lower than that. We could be slightly higher than that. When you're doing 350 meals as a restaurant, quick service restaurant, you're on the higher end or what the capacity needs to be. Of course, that needs to be managed by the recipes. If I have 50 items, 350 meals, not a whole lot I can cook. If I have one item, that's 350 meals, that's very predictable. Also, the right balance in the number of menu items. And that's where, by the way, AI comes in to really support us and help us make sure that our menus are meeting the expectations, both in terms of shelf life and customer desires.
Well, food waste is one of the biggest in the world in terms of carbon emissions, emitter of carbon emissions. So in what ways does SJW robotics technology reduce food waste and contribute to environmental sustainability?
So in the restaurant business, a lot of the food is wasted because of shelf life. Shelf life because your inventory wasn't effectively managed, or shelf life when the refrigerator breaks down in the middle of the night and you don't know until you come in the next morning. So when you're monitoring something 24/7, we make sure the inventory moves along properly, both in terms of stocking it so we can predict our sales smartly, avoiding food wastage, generating promotions if food is about to expire. So we can take all these precautions, or we can become better every day as we learn about the demand factors for our inventory. So that's one way we really put a big dent on reducing food wastage. The other thing we do for CO2 emissions is we don't use gas, so it's all induction cooking. And we did our initial study. We have 70% less carbon emissions compared to a comparable restaurant in the quick service space. And things, restaurants, the inefficiency comes from the equipment. Your air conditioning a restaurant is generating a lot of heat in the kitchen. And of course, the restaurants are designed for speed and quality and not for sustainability. That means in the Asian concept, you have a pot of boiling water all day to blanch your food. In our case, we generate steam only when the machine gets an order. It remains idle otherwise. So taking away all these inefficiencies, not having interior lighting and all that stuff, we're able to make a pretty big dent on sustainability of carbon emissions.
And that's something you wouldn't have already thought of. But one of the things everyone loves about restaurants is that they deliver, and we can get whatever we want whenever we want it. So how do you implement technology like this with home food delivery?
So that's the greatest thing and the greatest tragedy for the restaurant industry. I think in the last decade, the biggest growth has come from delivery, and COVID accelerated the inevitability. People increasingly love getting delivered all kinds of food, not just the old pizzas and stuff that we had before these delivery companies came into our lives. What problematic is delivery companies charge a pretty big amount for restaurants. It is not really profitable for most restaurants to engage in delivery, but you do it because you have no choice. And the reason is, food is only about 25% of your total cost. 30% is about labor, about 10% is occupancy cost. So in our model, we don't have any on-site labor. And we have a very small footprint, so practically almost no rent. So when we've taken away about 35% of the cost of a typical restaurant, we become actually profitable for delivery. So food in our restaurants, by the way, can be ordered on site on the screen, from your phone, from the Uber delivery app. We're agnostic. The difference is either you come pick up the food or the driver comes picks up the food. So we've actually made delivery profitable. And again, it's by taking away the inefficiencies and the massive costs a typical restaurant has. What if we could eliminate those costs? Again, food is only about 25-30% of your costs. Let's make sure that our numbers align with those costs.
That's interesting. And this was, I'm just curious, how do you manage security, though, if if everyone's a robot, to keep everything safe?
So our machine, by the way, had to go through an NSF certification process. Little details like, we have the locker systems where your bowl is ready, but there's a machine inside. People could put their hands inside and, have serious problems when the machine hits you. So the design of the machine has been, by default, make sure that it's very safe for consumers. There's a wall between the robot and the food locker system, so you cannot really put your hand through it. And most parts of the machine are inaccessible by anybody except the engineers that come to service it. So, for example, our partners in Compass, they put in the raw materials like broccoli and chicken into the machine when the machine prompts you to do so. They change the HVAC filters when it's time to replace them, and general maintenance. And these initial machines are all going into Compass facilities like universities, hospitals, and office towers. They already have a lot of people working in these buildings, and we've estimated they'll spend a few hours every day to make sure that the machine, there's nobody that's dropped something. Of course, we have cameras and everything else to make sure that the machine is also safe from customers and vice versa. So the box is self-contained. The only point of access is the food locker for customers, and that's safely secured to make sure you can't really put your hands all the way through.
It's funny. I can envision this in airports and places where you get a lot of people, like you said, a hospital or an office building. Kind of a two-part question: is there any place where you envision this idea, this concept being where people might not think it's the most obvious place? And also, what do you see in the future? I mean, do you see we'll actually have robots taking orders? I mean, where do you see this going in the future?
Well, I think the obvious place for a lot of these robots is where you can find labor. So a lot of 24 hours facilities like hospitals and airports. So you mentioned airports, which is amazing because the labor costs in airports are significantly higher because the employees need to be vetted and you have to park your car, et cetera, et cetera. It's a more controlled environment. The demand in airports is obscene. And we've seen after COVID, not all airports have recovered. Many restaurants are operating at half capacity or simply closed down. First, the obvious places where the need is, where the labor shortage is very acute. And then it's about convenience, right? How close can you be to your customers? Because of a small footprint and because we're real estate agnostic, we can have restaurants where traditionally you couldn't have restaurants. So for example, in an airport, I don't have to be in a food court. I can just be closer to the terminal. How can we be more closer to everybody else? So I think the evolution of this thing, I can see every brand having a bunch of robotic restaurants to complement the existing restaurants. I can also see as we get better, as we get more technology on communicating with the customers, and we already have apps like Uber and loyalty apps from brands that we can communicate with our smartphones. Increasingly, voice technology is getting integrated. Our next iteration will actually you'll be able to ask the machine to make a certain food for you, ask about your personal allergens. A lot of that technology, and we're partnering with companies like NVIDIA that gives us access to voice generation and AI to make sure the communication between people is great. And again, order ahead. So you know that you're going to be in that area around 2:30. The machine will start cooking when it senses your phone is somewhere close by. So the convenience factor is going to be great, and accessibility is going to be great. So if we're in an environment with senior citizens' homes where they're not looking at a small phone, they'll be able to talk to the machine and get their orders ready. So I can see that advancement in accessibility becoming more interesting.
It really is. It's just it's fascinating to imagine, and I think it'll be great to get these meals to more people that maybe couldn't get them, and also solve the labor shortage that you mentioned and reduce emissions. So it sounds like a win-win. Nipun Sharma, CEO of SJW Robotics, thank you so much for joining us on Techstrong TV.
Thank you for having me, Bonnie. Really nice to be here.
Absolutely. All right. Well, stay with us on Techstrong TV. We're going to have a lot more coming up.
SecurityBoulevard.com is the leading resource for news, analysis, and education on challenges facing the cybersecurity industry. SecurityBoulevard.com covers all aspects of cybersecurity, including data security, DevSecOps, cloud security, application security, network security, security threats, and more. SecurityBoulevard.com has the largest selection of security content, featuring breaking news, blog posts, podcasts, and more. Visit www.securityboulevard.com to learn more. SecurityBoulevard.com, home of Security Bloggers Network.
This is Techstrong TV.
Hey guys, thanks for the through. We're here with Frank Huerta, who's CEO for Curtail. And we're talking about how to figure out whether or not there are vulnerabilities and flaws in your software the easy way, because today we all seem to do it a little bit too much on the hard way, which is somebody else discovers it after something bad has already happened. Frank, welcome to the show.
Thank you very much.
Walk us through, why is it that we are so challenged in figuring out where all these vulnerabilities and flaws are? I think we all know that any piece of software written by a human has a problem. It's generally going to have some mistake, but we seem to be unable to kind of find this stuff until there's a crisis. So is there a smarter way to do this or to think about this?
Sure, Mike. I think there is. One is the software we have. It's grown. We have a lot of software out there. It's complicated, but also we really want to get things out fast to users, right? And there has been this, belief that, you can move fast and break things. And so maybe if it's not, fully baked, we can still throw it out there, right? But that we do get burned by that a lot, right? And that certainly has a lot of costs, has a lot of, reputation issues and things like that. So, we do try to, as software publishers, we do try to be very careful about, what we do and use, the latest and the best types of testing, but we also want to be expedient about it. Right. And so we use commercially known tests. We use, security testing, DAST, dynamic application security testing, SAST, where we actually look at the code, and then we also have homegrown tests. We have our manual tests, but most of those are static in time, right? So they are looking for known things. So they are saying, hey, I'm testing X to find Y. But if it's the test, if it's not, if X isn't in there to test, you're not going to find Y. And so inevitably, we miss things or we have regressions. We're constantly changing software and we change something and everything looks fine. And then, we put it out into the production and it breaks, right? And usually that's found by customers. And, because customers do weird things with your software that you don't anticipate a lot of times. And that's really where we've started, believing we could make a difference. My history, I don't know, Mike, has been in computer security. I co-founded a company called Recourse Technologies, where we were actually the first company to commercialize honeypots. But we were focused on finding zero-day attacks, if you will, novel attacks. And you understand the security problems and you say, geez, we don't want to let these bad guys in, but the bad guys really are exploiting bad code a lot of times. So if you could say, hey, could we move back up earlier in time and help ourselves write better code so that these things couldn't get exploited earlier? And could we find, in effect, zero-day bugs, if you will, right? Those bugs that you can find beforehand. Most of the testing we have out there, as I said before, is looking for known things, right? And even a lot of the AI-based things that you're doing, right? AI is really still relying on known data sets, right? It's like, hey, we have a big enough data set where we can approximate things that we've seen before. But what if you haven't seen it before? What if it's been designed to specifically evade those things you think you've seen before? So at Curtail, we've developed a process to a technology to actually find those flaws, or at least see the potential flaws that might happen from your normal customer interactions. And we do that by a fairly simple process where we actually compare your current version of software that is running, maybe your production version, and maybe say your next version coming up, it's your release candidate. And you can actually play your customer traffic at both of those. Obviously, one is already running, and you can see the effects of how that customer traffic will impact that new version, right? And you can see what changes have been introduced. You can see if it will be running faster. You can see, or slower, and by how much. And we can do that on a request by request basis. We can see if APIs have changed. We can see if security vulnerabilities have been introduced in certain cases. So, Cloudflare had an issue several years back where they did an upgrade, released some code, and it was releasing PII for 6 months. with our technology, we could have found that before they released, right? Customers eventually, actually a Google researcher eventually found it. But these are the kinds of things that we could actually help find and alleviate the pain before it becomes an issue. So it's really can bolster and supplement the current testing we have, because testing isn't, like I said, a static thing. Things change, right? So the tests you used 2 or 3 releases ago, they may not be any good anymore, right? And so how do you accommodate that? And that's what we're trying to do at Curtails is bring in real life data, real life interaction with your software, and see how it will change.
How far left does that process get? Am I doing that, say, within the IDE of the developer, or is it more embedded within my CI/CD platforms? Where does this all happen?
Yeah, this can take place at any point in your CI/CD pipeline. So it can be used, as you said, shifting left. You could actually have your developers compare the new version of software they're coding as they're, bringing in, writing in new code, and play it against a known a comparison of the last software and see what's changed. Think of the case of a refactoring. Hey, I'm trying to rewrite this fragile piece of code over there. I want it to still function the same way it does now, but I need to rewrite it, right? And I can't break. And so as you introduce new changes, you can see that the code is still doing the same thing as before. We can actually help you detect that. We look at the network responses from each of those and saying, hey, if I make this change, is the code still doing the same thing as before? We can also be used as a QA test, right? So we can say, hey, as I explained before, we've got a good release candidate. Let me see how this is actually going to perform, how it's going to work compared to our current production version that's out there. So really any of the CI/CD pipeline, and it can actually be used even after the fact. So you do your new release, and then you run the old release, the prior release that was in production. You continue to run that in shadow, if you will, and look at the interactions of both of those, and such that if you have a problem with that new release and you're going to have to roll back anyway, you can actually see where that problem occurred. And then from a root cause perspective, we can actually tell you where the actual, what requests caused that problem. So when you're tracking it down, you can say, oh, this kind of request caused this issue, this change, we can go find that.
What do you think is the issue that we have with testing in general these days? It seems like we are building more code than ever, or shipping it out faster than ever, and then we're hoping to kind of maybe fix it in the upgrade cycle, as you mentioned earlier. It almost feels like we're experimenting on the end customer, and I think that their tolerance for that is probably dropping. So what is your sense of why are we a little bit not so inclined to test as aggressively as maybe we should be?
Well, as I said earlier, there's a lot of pressure to get releases out quickly, right? There's demand, and just I got to move this software. And so there is a lot of pressure being felt to get that software out there, and then also, it's the tests that you're running. So most people are well-intentioned. They want to have good quality software. But a lot of the tests aren't comprehensive enough to cover the problems that might be out there. And so that's part of the challenge, right? You can, that's why we talk about these 0-day bugs, right? You can have all of the, the manual tests and the commercial tests that you want, but if they aren't designed to find the bugs that are in there, they're not going to find them. And so you need different approaches to see how those bugs might surface beforehand so you can fix them.
There's a lot of focus these days on all things DevSecOps, and some of what you do addresses that, and other parts of what you do seem to be a little more on the quality assurance side. Do you think that quality assurance and security testing is all going to converge into one motion, because ultimately it is all about the impact of the experience?
Yeah, I mean, we're certainly true believers in DevSecOps, and really, at least the way we interpret that is that, the developers, and you talked about shifting left a little earlier, the developers are really not only concerned with their own development, but they're concerned with the quality and security of the software. And so if you can start doing those tests, or trying to screen for some of those problems earlier on, you won't have to find out those problems later in production, or try and even if you're testing for them later, it's more expensive to test for these things later in the process, right? So now your security team, you're at the end of a release, now your security team says, oh, I gotta do all this testing for security problems, right? And so I gotta run all these DAS tests or whatever. If you can do that earlier in the process, it's more efficient, it saves time, you're going to find those bugs potentially earlier. But DevSecOps is also sort of a cultural change that needs to be adopted throughout the entire really engineering organization. They can't be siloed. You can't just say, well, the developers, I'm going to throw my code over the wall, QA will test it, they'll throw it over the wall, and security guys will look at it, and then we'll see what happens. If you really integrate everything, that's DevSecOps.
As you think through this whole process, what is the role of the testing teams that used to be there? Are they still part of this process, or have we embedded this so far into the DevOps workflow that those folks aren't required because everything is being surfaced as we're writing the code?
No, the testing teams are still going to be there. The tests themselves don't go away. It's just things may change a bit, right? And it's not all going to be on the developers. There still has to be a team that puts the stuff through and puts it into operations and things like that. So that's not going to go away. It may be reimagined in some way, right? I mean, I've read articles about all the AI stuff, and AI can take away all the the testers that are out there. Maybe some, but again, those people can be repurposed. And it's not going to take away everything. It's going to the way they interact with the software and test it now is still going to be there. There may be aids that come through with some of the AI based things, but in general, those jobs are still going to be there. They may be repurposed in some way, but those people are still going to need the need for those people is still going to be there.
You mentioned AI, and there are lots of new forms of it, generative AI. Everybody's kind of talking about it right now. What is your sense of how smart can all this automated testing get? What's the future look like?
Well, I think, we'd like to say, hey, let's just push a button and let the robots handle it, right? And let's make it easy. And I think AI has got great promise. It's been, I was doing stuff with it 30 years ago in an engineering job, right? And so, and the things we're doing these days at scale are really impressive. But we also just can't blindly trust it, right? And so when I see things, and I read an article, I think on your site that said, hey, that AI generated code can cause problems, right? There are bugs in that, and so you always have to sort of ask yourself, who's checking the AI itself? How are we checking it? And so that's going to be something that's going to be something we need to be concerned about. And I would like to think that Curtail could help in that process, because we have an objective way of testing, hey, here was one version, here's the next version that came out, what changed, what objectively changed about it. And, if you are going to automate, the AI certainly can run lots of tests, lots of known tests, right? But again, how is it going to find for those unknown things that it hasn't seen before? And so its role will be critical, but it may not be exclusive.
To your point, we may need AI to check on the AI, right?
Well, or we may need a system that is a different AI system to check on it, right? Because if it's policing itself, in some ways you got to watch out that it's not the fox guarding the hen house.
So ultimately, what's your best advice to organizations? What do you see folks who are doing testing right doing that you kind of wish other folks would implement a similar set of best practices?
Well, I think you just mentioned there at the end, implement those best practices. Put your pipeline in place. Use the best sets of automated tests that are out there. run the actual security tests that are out there, have a good platform, and do those, do your, the basics. I would like to say you should add some of the things that we're doing to make your testing more comprehensive. And also, really try to instill that culture of DevOps and DevSecOps. We still see a lot of things still being siloed. And really, if you to get that working together, it can be a really strong value proposition. Where again, if you're able to shift left, get some of these things done earlier in the process, it really does make a tangible difference in cost savings and product quality at the end.
All right, cool. All right, folks, you heard it here. Good processes still make for good software, and there is no substitute. Hey, Frank, thanks for being on the show.
Thank you very much.
All right, and back to you guys in the studio.
This is Techstrong TV.
Hey guys, thanks for the throw. We're here with Jora Kashti and Eyal Fisher. They are the co-founders of a new company called Sweet Security, and they're focused on cloud runtimes, and we're going to jump into what all that means. Gentlemen, welcome to the show.
Thank you.
Thank you. Thank you, Mike.
All right. Jora, let's get started with what is the problem you're trying to solve? I mean, we've had the cloud around for 10 years now or more. We've been talking about security for 9 years and 364 days ever since then. And so my first question to you is, what's left to solve and why haven't we solved it already?
So look, there is a very good solution for the cloud, but there is just, I think, one main gap regards to detection and response in runtime on the cloud. It used to be the CISO, the chief security of the IDF. It means that I was the CISO of our nation. And I had the responsibility to go to a huge program called Nimbus. And I look for good tools to do the detection and response in runtime on the public cloud, and I couldn't find anything. Something in the shared responsibility between, the government or the people and the vendor, the public cloud vendor, that if someone will try to breach into the infrastructure, it's the cloud vendor responsible. If you don't put a good programmer, it's your responsibility. But the shared responsibility, if someone, and you must assume that someone will breach into your environment, I looked for good tools and I couldn't find anything. No good tools that doing the detection response on the runtime on the cloud. So this is my pain, my personal pain. And when I retired, I told myself that I must solve this problem, and I called my co-founder, tell him, let's do this.
So, Eyal, how did we solve this problem? Because to Jora's point, we have this shared responsibility model, and sometimes I feel if it's a shared responsibility, it means nobody's responsible for it. So how do we take control of this thing?
Exactly. So that's our unique approach. We take into consideration the fact that that native apps that are running on cloud are actually applications and not just computers connected to a network. So we take that into consideration, and we built a solution built specifically for that scenario, cloud native apps. And we have a unique mechanism that auto-learns your environment, the application, and detect anomalies that are happening. So nothing is going to fall between responsibilities. It's not just the cloud. It's not just a programmer. It's our responsibility to understand what is running on the cloud and when something weird is happening.
So, Dror, I think part of the issue that we've had all these years is we've tried to lift and shift an on-premise security model into the cloud, and it doesn't really work, and it takes a while for us to all figure that out. I'm not sure why, but it seems to be the case. So what have you seen? What's your best advice to folks about how to kind of make that transition? Because it seems it's as much a cultural issue as it is a technical issue.
So yes, as you mentioned, I really believe to go to the public cloud, but I don't call it a lift and shift. I call it lift, adapt, and shift. This is what you should do. And I did it for many years in the IDF. You know, there is many advantage going to the public cloud, very good even in the security essence. But you must adapt your solution to the cloud. It's not just to lift and shift, it's to adapt it, to enable your, from the development through the application, to the new environment, to the cloud environment. And you can't just take your legacy and put it in the cloud because you lose. And you can't stand in then the on-prem solution. You must take it, adapt it, and move it to the cloud.
Yeah, what makes cloud native applications different? I mean, in some ways, going back to the lift and shift thing, we took virtual machines and put them on a cloud and called it something different than an on-premise environment, but it just seemed like we were moving our mess from our data center to somebody else's. Cloud native apps or containers, Kubernetes, what makes that more challenging from a security perspective?
So the main issue is that the attack surface is huge. I mean, you have now microservices. Each one can be an entry point to your environment. So it's a lot more complicated. When a server just moved to the cloud, at the end, it's the same server. You can protect it the same way you did. Now you have piece of software, many pieces, running in various places, connected to each other, connected to the world, running a library that you don't, I mean, the security team might not even be aware of the way everything works. So it's a lot more complicated environment to protect. And that's the main difference.
Dror, how smart are the bad guys getting about all this stuff? I mean, are they targeting these applications more? Are they looking for Kubernetes and containers? Sometimes I talk to developers and they're like, my container's only going to run for a few seconds. What can happen?
So a lot can come in a few seconds. First of all, the attackers became more smarter, and there is the supply chain attack that goes through into your container, and it will be always vulnerability in your code. Always, you must assume that it will be breached. So either it could be container or microservices. The attack surface is huge, and I believe, and I see it in my eyes. I saw it in my eyes that the attacker will be there. They change. It's not the same attack like it was in the endpoint and on-prem and the endpoint attack, because you don't need to do the lateral movement or other things. You just attack, breach into the container, and from there you can take everything you want. So I think it's different attack, different way of attack, but with a large, huge volume and a huge space, but it will be attack.
Yeah, well, I'm not sure everybody takes all this stuff seriously enough, because they're basically think that the worst thing that happens is there's some cryptojacking, somebody comes along and steals some CPU power, and some people even consider that a nuisance crime. But do we need to take this more seriously, and why?
Yeah, we already have seen a few attacks that made a huge, quite a disaster for some organizations. That data can be leaked out of organizations easily, and if your production environment is on cloud, I mean, you will probably would like to make sure that it's going to continue working without any interruption. So if an attacker can cause you a downtime, for example, for your environment, that's a huge problem. So there are various ways in which attackers can actually harm organizations quite easily in cloud environments. Actually, it's going to be even more easy for them than they used to do it on-prem environment when they need to harm many computers to do as Tor said, to do the lateral movement, get to many endpoints, go to your servers, find the backups, and so on. Now you have production environment that can be down in no time.
Dror, why don't the cloud service providers do more about this? I think a lot of developers assume that the cloud service providers are doing more than they are, and maybe someday they will, or is that not likely to happen just because they don't want to be responsible for this?
First of all, I think that service providers are doing better, and they do the security job, but you always need to protect your environment. You can use some of these tools, but you must build an autonomous tools that is under your responsibility. And as a CISO, you couldn't just trust the service provider. You need something that you're under your responsibility to do it. So I think that there are good tools of these provider security tools, but it's just a lack of the responsibility of you to use your tools in order to protect the environment.
Yeah, I can't walk down the street without somebody leaping out to tell you about their great new AI thing. So my question to you is, at some point, is AI going to save us from ourselves here?
So for AI to help us in cloud security, I think that first we need to do it ourselves, and AI is going to come just afterwards. Yet we can utilize AI technology even now in order to understand, for example, what should be the next step after we found everything that happened in a breach or an attack, recommendations for next steps, remediation and stuff like that can help because you have the history in order for the AI to learn from it, and then you get you might get good recommendations for next steps. So that's where I see AI come into that area.
Dror, what's your best advice for folks, especially CISOs that are looking at all this stuff and they might not be conversant in cloud native, they might not even know what the cloud is per se, so how do they proceed down and have this conversation in a way that makes them credible?
So first, I think that you must learn and adapt the new technology and always learn and adapt it. And second, from my perspective, I think that in order to make a good defense, you must have, I call it, a boots on the cloud. You can't just, go up and believe that everything will be in your logs, or believe that the service provider will give you the security. You must, I call it, have boots on the cloud in order to feel it, know everything that's going over there, and can detect and respond to the attackers.
All right. Speaking of boots on the cloud, Eyal, what's that one thing you see customers and security teams doing that just makes you shake your head and go, folks, we need to be better than that?
Yeah, so maybe the one thing that we see all the time is that SOC teams need to adapt as well. It's not just, the R&D that adapted to cloud nicely. And you need also your SOC team to get used to protect cloud environments. And usually it doesn't happen. So you have a very expensive SOC team protecting your not so important stuff in the organization. And that's quite quite a challenge because you need to upgrade the knowledge and you need to give them the tools. So that's what we are trying to do, to make sure that the SOC team will have the visibility to the cloud environment and will get the important stuff that is needed in order to understand that you got breached and how to get out of it. So that's
all right, folks, you heard it here. Cloud native security is a whole new ballgame. Don't bring your prejudices and biases to this whole area because what you used to know probably doesn't apply. Gentlemen, thanks for being on the show.
Thank you.
Thank you.
It was a pleasure.
All right, and back to you guys in the studio.
In today's world, data is an organization's most valuable asset. It empowers companies to make informed business decisions, improve operations, reduce costs, and increase revenue. Organizations are increasingly adopting data ops to get full visibility and control of their data pipeline, boost efficiency and quality, fuel digital transformation initiatives, and maximize business value. On August 16th, 2023, Data Ops Day will take a deep dive into the world of data and data ops. Register now for this day-long virtual event.
Hi, everyone. Thank you so much for joining our session today. We hope you've been having a great time at Cloud Native Now and have had a chance to stop by all the great sessions on the agenda. Today, we're going to be talking about a standard approach to container security and really harnessing the power of prevention. My name is Christina DePinto. I'm a product marketing manager at Tenable, and I'm joined today by my colleague, Upkar Litter, senior product manager at Tenable. Just a few key takeaways of what we're going to be talking about in this session. We're going to be talking about current challenges of securing container infrastructure, why DevSecOps is an approach is necessary, and then implementation considerations for security tools. So you might be asking yourself, why is Tenable at Cloud Native Now? Because you might know us by Tenable Nessus, which is the world's #1 vulnerability management solution. We've been around for 20 years, and Nessus is really at the heart of our cybersecurity history. You also might notice that we are the maintainers of TerraScan, an open source infrastructure as code scanning tool. It's one of the most well-loved open source security tools in the industry. But what we're really here to talk about today is how Tenable has extended its cyber pedigree to the cloud. We're really excited to draw on 20 plus years of cybersecurity excellence to really bring in full stack coverage from hybrid cloud vulnerability management, multi-cloud governance and CSPM, Kubernetes and KSPM capabilities, public cloud web app scanning, and of course, container security, what we're here to talk about today. And I know it's not lost on this audience that cloud native infrastructure is really a story of parts and pieces. And to security teams, deploying containers can often seem like it's deploying chaos. That's because some of the benefits of them being really easy to spin up and really easy to deploy make them kind of the biggest security risk. Containers are short-lived, and that ephemeral nature makes it so then traditional security tools can't really do the job, and new processes need to come into the fold. For example, container infrastructure is not secure by design, and it's built for speed, not necessarily security. So default configurations are not always secure. In addition, securing containers requires a lot of multiple tools and multiple teams, which can increase alert fatigue. And without any sort of strategy or prioritization, you really can't secure your container infrastructure and therefore your larger attack surface with all these disparate tools and processes. And we know with more tools, we're actually becoming less secure. New reporting from Slim AI that was shared at KubeCon North America in 2022 says that 66% of companies use publicly available containers, and containers have 60% more vulnerabilities than they have in prior years. And we really don't have the resources in order to remediate all these vulnerabilities. There's a 4 times faster detection rate of vulnerabilities than we can remediate. And with that remediation issue, we don't have the processes in place in order to scale at this level. Only 1 in 4 developers really understand system hardening, but they can't be the only ones focusing on security when shifting left. It's a big security best practice that security needs to live where the DevOps team lives during the build process. However, we can't just pass the buck to those teams without having it be governed by security teams. And at Tenable, we really believe that security requires security teams. And so, yes, I'm sure you're sitting there saying, okay, thanks, that's obvious. Thanks, Captain Obvious. I had to put a bad dad joke in here. But this is really not the prevailing school of thought. And it's a lot harder to put into practice than you might think. And what's often missing is a balanced approach. Security needs to ensure that only trusted images are used and really take that on to make sure that images are frequently scanned for vulnerabilities throughout the build process. They also need to make sure that they're adopting technologies and tools that work across platforms and environments. And they also need to centrally define and manage policy enforcement. And this feeds right into what development teams need. They need the right information and skills and tools in order to make sound security decisions. And that needs to be governed by the security team. They need integrated security practices that emphasize automation and efficiency. And they need consistent automated practices that interlock into existing dev workflows. So we've set up this big problem. How do you get there? How do you get to true DevSecOps? My colleague Afkar is going to walk through some of the solutions.
So here's our approach on container security. We recommend a preventative approach where security is not just an afterthought, but is built into the development process. Developers need to scan and remediate issues and vulnerabilities locally on their machines before pushing code into any SEM system. Now, this, of course, can be automated using patterns like pre-commit hooks and building some checks or building the same checks in your CI pipelines where code is built into an image and tested before it gets merged into your main branch. Secondly, we highly recommend auto-scanning registries when a new image becomes available with the same policies that were used on the developer machines. Of course, you should put in the same guardrails before the image is deployed to production to automate these checks. Finally, when an image is deployed to production, you can use Kubernetes controls to validate the images one last time before they're made available in containers and deployed in your cluster. However, most importantly, you need systems in place in order to create a governance model to ensure the same policies are used throughout these processes and workflows. These custom policies need to be created by the security teams and handed over to the development teams to add and enforce as guardrails as described earlier. Now, one way to achieve this is through our just released container security feature in Tenable Cloud Security, which leverages our policy as code framework. Security teams can use a no-code editor to create complex policies without writing a single line of Rego code, along with remediation actions that are shown to developers at this time of policy evaluation. Developers, on the other hand, can use the powerful CLI to integrate image vulnerability checks and policy evaluations in their DevOps pipelines. Now, there are a few reasons to focus on image and registries instead of waiting to add scanning and running clusters in your production environments. While security and development teams are good at their own functions, taking a registry-focused approach, they can really work together for maximum impact. Having these checks in place early ensures that developers can identify and address vulnerabilities in code bases during the development phase itself. So this reduces the chances of vulnerabilities going unnoticed and reaching production where they could be more costly and time-consuming to fix. Secondly, this shift-left registry approach ensures and encourages collaboration and communication between the developers, security teams, and other stakeholders. It fosters a shared responsibility for security, and more importantly, promotes a culture of proactive risk management instead of reactive risk management. So teams can proactively identify and address security weaknesses, reducing the overall attack surface and enhancing the security posture of your software and infrastructure. Teams can also streamline security assessments and compliance requirements, thus enabling faster release cycles and quicker time to market. Finally, all this adds up, and addressing security issues early in the development process can be significantly more cost-effective than resolving them later on after deployment. All right, so now let us look at a quick demo of how this works in practice. So the first thing is security teams going into Tenable Cloud Security and creating a policy using the no-code editor. So I'm creating a policy on an image type resource. Here, I'm going to keep this really simple and say if my image contains a tag we call latest, or I have a vulnerability with a VPR score greater than 9, then I want this policy to fail. So I'm going to continue, and then give this policy a name, high VPR, or latest tag found. I'm going to say this is my security best practice. This policy is a high severity. I'm going to add it to an existing policy group, and then add a remediation description here saying update the affected packages to reduce the VPR. So now that the security team has created this policy using the no-code editor, let's look at how the developer can now enforce this policy in their environment. So I've got a simple Node.js project here with this Docker file. It's just a hello world application. Docker file, as you can see, starts off with a base image, adds in some dependencies, and then finally uses the npm command to start the application. Now, I've already built this image since we don't have a lot of time here, but I want to show you how the developer will use the TCS CLI to scan this image for vulnerabilities and enforce the policy that was created previously. So again, for the sake of time, I've already run this command, so I'm going to show you what the output looks like. The CLI reads the image in, breaks it down into the different layers, and starts doing creating an inventory that then gets evaluated for policy violations. So if I go all the way at the bottom here, you'll see one policy got violated. There's a highest VPR score of 9.7. So if you remember the policy we created, we said if there's a score of greater than 9, then fail the policy, and that has been enforced here. In addition to that, it has found 113 different CVEs with different severities as well. So this is the CLI version. The developers can now take the same approach and use in their CI pipeline. So in this case, I have a simple CI pipeline in GitHub Actions. And the code here essentially downloads the TCS CLI and then uses the same command that you saw before. More importantly, uses the same policies that was created by the security team, who, as Christina pointed out, are the experts in the policy domain. And then finally, it outputs the same JSON report. So let me show you. I've already run this again for the sake of time here. And if I go all the way at the bottom in this step that has failed, you'll see the same policy results as well as the vulnerability summary is given here. But now I also have a JSON report that the developers can go in, look for the specific VPR that was greater than 9.7, and then also look at the remediation action to fix this broken image. All right. Finally, back in Tenable Cloud Security, you can come to the containers dashboard, look at all of the images that have been scanned in the pipelines and registry, as well as go to the resources view, where actually we can look at the exact image that was just scanned. And that would be this one here. So again, metadata around the image, as well as the vulnerabilities and the policy violations are all shown in the same place, making it easier for you to then take remediation and escalation actions. All right, to summarize, In traditional software development, developers focus on writing code while security engineers focus on creating security policies, right? Unfortunately, the security aspect is usually an afterthought and causes a lot of friction between the teams, as well as it impacts the development velocity in a negative way. Container security is a shared responsibility that requires the expertise of both of these teams. A central governance model created by the security team plays a crucial role in ensuring effective and consistent security policies across the organization, right? It allows the security teams to define and enforce the policies that adhere to industry standards, compliance requirements, and can be applied consistently. Secondly, security teams often face resource constraints and have the challenge of effectively managing security processes, right? By implementing container registry scanning, security teams can gain the ability to proactively identify vulnerabilities and security concerns in container images before they're ever deployed to production. Once deployed in production, security then becomes more reactive than proactive. This image and registry-centric approach empowers security teams to focus their efforts on critical security tasks and prioritize remediation efforts. So it saves a lot of time. Lastly, container registry scanning facilitates crucial collaboration between your security teams and your developers, right? Again, the security team has the expertise in identifying vulnerabilities, defining security standards, governance models, and policies. On the other hand, developers are now responsible for integrating these security policies and guardrails into their workflows, as shown in the demo. So developers should be empowered to enforce security policies, and this ensures the teams not only use more secure images, but also develop closed-loop processes for remediation and escalation. Even though our presentation is done for today, we would love to chat with you more in our bi-weekly cloud security coffee break sessions, where we dive into technical security topics with industry experts. You can scan the QR code for more details, and we hope to see you there. Thank you.
Hi again, everyone. I hope you all enjoyed today's episode of Techstrong TV. We had an amazing set of interviews with industry professionals to give you the inside scoop into the tech world. We'll be back again on Monday, so we hope to see you then. In the meantime, though, if you want more Techstrong TV content, be sure to check out our podcasts or download our mobile app. Thank you so much for watching, and I hope you have a wonderful rest of your day. As always, stay strong. Techstrong.